even some of your on-prem applications are using the browser-based application as a service. And it's smart, it's getting away from some of those vulnerabilities that they had, but then it creates new vulnerabilities. And that's always the gamble in cyber, is you're going from this vulnerability to that vulnerability. We have to approach it from an enterprise perspective. And that can come back and bite the organization, even government, if we're not careful in making sure that, the right licensing, the T's and C's. I've had that happen. We had a product that they were leveraging, the free version, and they came back and said, hey, you have X amount of these deployed across your organization, and you're an enterprise, so we're going to start charging you. At the end of the day, we negotiated, but I think there's a little lack of knowledge in government that free is not free. What's the one thing you would want more of? And I would always tell them it's time. I never could get enough time to get things done as fast as I wanted to get them done. I like to move at the speed of business, fast. I would like to have more time to get things done in a better state.
Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Brian Gardner, interim CISO for the city of Austin, and a seasoned cybersecurity leader with over a decade of experience spanning healthcare, telecom, nonprofit, and government sectors. Before joining the city of Austin, Brian served as CIO, CTO, and CISO for the city of Dallas, where he led transformative initiatives in municipal IT security. Beyond his impressive career, Brian also has a PhD in information technology from Capella University and actively mentors students interested in IT security careers. I'm excited to explore Brian's insights, and welcome to the show, Brian.
Hey, thank you, John, for inviting me.
Great. So, let's start a little bit about your career journey and leadership. Your career has taken you from the Marines to consulting and now the public sector. Could you share how you got started in cybersecurity? Was there some kind of pivotal moment?
Yes, John. So actually, it's kind of a weird, funny story. So when I was going through my time at Syracuse University, Utica College, I actually have a bachelor's in forensic accounting. But one of my first classes was information security, and the professor, his name is Dr. Randall Nichols. He is professor now at KU. He came and he made that class so inviting that basically that's how I chose to go into the information security realm. It was just the projects we worked on were kind of so out there. It got you thinking outside the box. And I said, I'm really enjoying this, and I'm not really enjoying chasing pennies. So I'm going to pivot and go into information security.
That's cool. Yeah. So funny. My first degree plan in college was also accounting. So I spent my first year doing accounting work, and I really liked it. But I started working with computers like in 1982, and really could never get myself stopping working on computers. So I loved it. So I ended up getting my undergraduate degree in computer and information science. Because every time I was doing anything, I would just come back to IT. But yeah, so it's interesting. So you started out with doing was it a forensic accounting class, or that was
forensic accounting degree? I was really, looking for fraud management, fraud detection. I thought that would be fun. They're definitely cousins, fraud and cybersecurity. So it was an easy move. It also has helped me in my cyber career to look at how fraud is impacted by cybersecurity.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100% that I think today, especially in our digital economy, there's a lot of overlap in fraud and cybersecurity in the digital space. Definitely something I learned at Expedia. And I was doing all the cybersecurity stuff, but whenever there was an incident on the fraud side, I was asked to go recover the money, to try to find out where everything went and everything else. And a lot of it was in the technical details of how we did transactions there. So very, very, very interesting. But yeah, so you took an information security class, you thought this is more interesting and kind of pivoted that way, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I finished my degree in forensic accounting, and And then the very first thing I said is, I'm going to information security. So I went and got my master's, and then eventually my doctorate in information security.
Wow. So you have a doctorate in information security as well. What was your doctorate in? What was the subject matter? Can I ask?
So yeah, no problem. It's actually in disaster recovery and emergency medical services. To give it as fine a point as I can.
Right.
Really looked at how does disaster recovery, what are the systems that are needed, how do they act, and what is that outcome. It's just a small piece in the realm of knowledge, but it contributed to that knowledge.
Yeah, that's great. I think that one of the interesting things that's happening today. I think definitely in disaster recovery and how do you manage your response is an incredibly important part of IT and cybersecurity. I feel like I'm pretty good at a lot of things, but one of the things I learned just in recent news that Coinbase had a cyber attack, and they really did a really good job of like promoting it. They had like CEO videos talking about the attack. They had like a $20 million extortion attempt, but then they said, we're going to take that $20 million and we're going to put a bounty for law enforcement to anyone that can help us go find these actors. And for me was, how to do crisis management well within cyber, and it's, because a lot of what we have to do is like, how do we recover the most quickly, both from a reputational perspective and, getting things back online. But, I felt like, wow, those guys really turned, the cyber attack on its ear just because of how they handled it. And so I think that anytime that we can do something to better how do we recover, I think is a good thing. But that was a learning experience for me the last couple of days.
And so in municipal government, there's a lot. I don't know if people are familiar with the bond program, but each municipal government usually has some kind of bond program. The bond people have really started to focus in on, it's not so much how you're protecting and detecting and those pillars within this, it's how you're responding and recovering. Because inevitably you're going to get hit by something, but how quickly you respond and recover to it is almost more important. How quickly you can get the critical services back on its feet, so police can dispatch and fire can respond and EMS can send ambulances.
Yeah, so more of a cyber resilience focus instead of
very much so about resiliency.
Yeah, I noticed that in my dealings with cyber insurance. The kind of questions that they started to ask are really much more concerned about, do you know what systems are important? And then how quickly can you recover from them if they are attacked, right? And so,
yeah, I mean that's where it's funny, because when I got into and wrote my dissertation on disaster recovery, everybody talked about it. It was a pillar in cyber. Not too many people did it because there's a cost associated. If you never use it, it's just a empty cost. I think they're seeing the value now that it has to be an important part of your cyber program, and getting your feet back up under you is part of that.
Normally, when we talk about cybersecurity, most people talk about confidentiality.
Oh, yeah.
We protect secrets and how we protect things. But, the other part of that triad is availability. How do we get the business operating as fast as we can, recovering from that incident so that we can start transacting again? It's incredibly important to the business. They don't want to be out of business.
Right.
They want to start recovering. Business is big enough, then they can recover from most cybersecurity incidents pretty quickly. But for some businesses, it could really take them out. So I think it's really interesting about what you were talking about, what municipality perspective, right? Where the police and the fire department and ambulance services and stuff that the municipality is providing. I had not been thinking about that. That must be an important part of what you're doing for the city of Austin as the CISO.
So honestly, I'm only in day one, John, of being CISO, so I don't have any legs under me at all yet. But as a deputy CIO there, I managed the infrastructure and operations. I had a counterpart that was really over public safety. But we partnered together. You have to look at it in municipal government. What is the most critical thing that could be impacted in an event. And it's by far always police, fire response, ambulance. And then you can get into, other departments and how you need to bring them back online and what's the criticality there, making sure that even city council can function as they need to, stuff like that.
Yeah, I like you said, I think whenever you're, definitely I would think that police and fire response and ambulances, the things that are going to, that loss of life is potentially impacted. I think those things are probably going to be high on the list of things to keep up with.
Yeah, whether it's here in Austin or when I was in Dallas. I mean, ultimately there isn't an argument too much about that. Your dispatch and your ambulance is 911. That's the top of the barrel as far as criticality.
Well, tell us a little bit more about what you do for the city of Austin. I mean, like you said, I think you just took the interim CISO role. So, you're just getting your legs underneath it. It's just still in transition. But the deputy CIO role, maybe you've been there for like 4 months now?
Yeah. So, yes, I've been with the city of Austin for about 4 months, serving as the deputy CIO over infrastructure and operations. And so what that means, Austin is an interesting place because they have a lot of departments. You have aviation there, you have energy, you have water, you have a lot of the other departments. Then you have public safety, and they're all, I don't want to say disparate. They have multiple things going on at the same time, and it's not that dissimilar than when I was in Dallas. But as the deputy CIO over infrastructure, really, I'm responsible for the base network, the base endpoints, servers, the real infrastructure, and managing it, making sure we're looking at our data center, where we need to modernize the infrastructure, and how we're going to move forward in aligning with my new role as a CISO and how that all plays together.
I guess one of the questions I would have is, working with the military myself, we had like a global information grid that kind of kept most of the networks all kind of together. Do municipalities do something similar, or does energy have a different network, completely separate network, or do y'all have shared infrastructure? And
the answer is sort of kinda.
Right.
There is some pieces that are segmented. You have, in critical infrastructure and in the utilities, you have your SCADA systems, which should be segmented from your city network. The CTEC network has its own network there. But there is some shared across. It's more complicated than a simple answer, we'll say, to saying, yeah, it's all shared or isn't. There's some definite bridges, and then there's some definite gaps.
You said that you have a data center. So are y'all still working with data centers primarily, or y'all pushing to the cloud as well?
We're looking at the hybrid model, hybrid piece where you have a data center footprint. I mean, we actually got multiple data centers, but you have this data center footprint, and then you have things that make sense to move to the cloud. I look at it as like it's a cloud smart approach, not just a cloud first approach, and seeing where we can leverage, and it makes sense to move stuff to the cloud and get out of the data center business with that application or system.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you were the CIO for the city of Dallas. Why'd you decide to go between Dallas and Austin?
I got an offer I couldn't refuse, I guess. I had been 7.5 years in Dallas. Loved Dallas, thought the world of Dallas. The city manager moved from Dallas to Austin, and I kind of knew how he governed. He didn't really recruit me to come to Dallas. The CIO at the time did, and I really wanted to work for her. And I thought this was a great opportunity to make another impact somewhere else. And so it's just ironic that I came over there to be the deputy CIO, and here I am, the CISO again. But hey, you never know what you're going to get into.
You never know what you're going to get into, where the next job's going to be, or what your next responsibilities are. I mean, I think that's the thing about people that know what they're doing is that they tend to attract additional responsibilities.
Yeah. I'm not good at saying no either, so I tend to attract a lot of that.
Yeah. I think I'm not either. I usually start with a CISO role, and then I end up getting more IT responsibilities. That's what happens to me. But it's the same thing. It's like, hey, I can help here. Let me help here. And next thing you know, I volunteered myself into, owning all the network infrastructure or all the endpoint management or whatever it is that's I happen to want to help in at the time.
Mine was very similar. I started as a CISO owning security, and then I ended up owning data management, and then moved into the CTO role in Dallas, where I owned all of operations. And then as the CIO departed, I ended up owning it all. So, and I love the challenge. I truly love the challenge. I have a moment of aha and little question, scary, and then dive in and go.
Yeah. So, so you've held the roles for CIO, CTO, and CISO. I have my own opinions of this, but how do these roles complement each other? What's it like owning it all? It's like you have it all.
To me, it's, I don't look at it like owning it all so much. I look at it as like, what is the challenge and how can I make this the best it can be? And even as a CISO, whether I was in private or public, my thought was always, well, I'm going to do best practice. I know that, CISOs are challenged with, we got to be compliant with this and we got to be compliant with that. And I'm a compliance guy. I mean, at the root of me, that's what I did when I started. I looked at it as, how do we make best practice, and compliance just shows up. And I kind of took it to the next level when I was moved into the CTO role is, okay, how are we going to make best practice in operations? So we moved into, hey, let's do best practices, whether it was infrastructure or it was application support. And at the same time, I still had security. So it was, okay, let's make the best operational team that we can. And that was my direction. And then it was the same when I moved in the CIO role. I inherited project management and business relationship management and finance and all those things. I just wanted it to be the best that we could be. And at the end of the day, there's some things that fall and things that are amiss, but are we doing the best? Are we producing the best IT we can supporting the business?
I would agree. I definitely agree with you. I mean, I think that no matter what the role is, right, you want to do what's best for that role, right? You have a business objective. When you're in the CTI and the CIO role, it feels like if you also have that security hat, you have that security responsibility, security accountability, even though I think we tend to identify vulnerabilities or have findings or things that we're kind of managing this checklist of things that we want to, move into a controlled way. We want to protect whatever it is that we're protecting. But the responsibility for executing on it kind of sits in the CIO, CTO.
Yeah. So I guess, and I'm a security guy, through and through to the bone. My approach there was, like I said, it was building the best practice in that. And then honestly, when they moved me into the CTO and CIO role, I didn't want to shed it. I wanted to be still intimately involved, but I wanted to take things to the next level organizationally with always the security in my mind going, I'm still a security guy at heart. And at the end of the day, if I see something, unlike probably CIOs that hadn't grown up there, security was always hand in hand with doing the CIO role. So, if there was an incident, I was very intimately involved as a CIO. I had transitioned some of that off to an interim CISO there. As a CTO, I wasn't allowed really to decouple. So I wore both hats and it wasn't bad at all. It actually allows you to put a foot in each and say, okay, infrastructure, you need to do this, and security, you still need to play well with the infrastructure team, because sometimes you're going to see those rubs wherever you go. There's always some combativeness between the infrastructure or the operational side and the CISO or the security side, because security guys are there to make sure it's protected. Infrastructure guys are to make sure it's running. Sometimes protection feels like it's in lieu of actually running, and we don't want that. So it allowed me to make sure that they were equal voice.
I agree. The eventual role for the CISO, or like, it's definitely in the path, like go from a CISO to a CIO to a CTO. I feel like that's kind of like the growth path, Do you think that that's the growth path, CISO to CIO, or?
I think this is what I really think about the CISO itself. And I think that's a fairly new role in the grand scheme of things, that you could take it in any direction. Like you could base your career on being a CISO and retire as a CISO and have a great career, whether you're in municipal government or you decide to go back to private or vice versa. For me, I always have to be challenged. I don't like to be bored. I'm not saying I got bored as a CISO, but I felt I needed more challenge. And so they made sure I was challenged. And it made me, there's places in infrastructure I wasn't comfortable. I knew about them. I could speak to them intelligently, but I was not intimate with networking or fiber or, even server management. And it allowed me to grow me into those roles and then have a better understanding from the CISO's perspective. Like, okay, now some of this conflict between some of those makes sense. I guess my feeling is, and I've communicated this to like city managers and assistant city managers, is the CISO role is fairly new to municipal government. And when you look at it, they need to have a voice. They don't necessarily have to report to the city manager, but they need to have a voice to the city manager to say, I know we're doing technology, but here's some gotchas that you need to be aware of that are real. I mean, in my time in Dallas, I had lived through multiple incidences that were fairly major. And I had that voice to the city manager, and he wanted to hear what I had to say. And that's really important, so they understand what is needed from, your personnel resources all the way through to your financial resources, to what do we need to do to protect the organization. And we can't divert the funds just to more IT. We need to really divert them and keep them in your security realm. And that was part of the program in my tenure there. Is we started out at about 2.3% of the IT budget in dedicated to cyber. And when I departed as CIO, we were at 9.5. So we were close to that magic button of 10%. And you could tell the difference. The program had its own breath, and it moved forward in a very mature fashion.
You're saying 9% of the IT budget is what, right? Yeah, that sounds like a very healthy cybersecurity budget from my experience.
Yeah, it was, when I got there, it was one tool that they were using to try to manage all of the pieces of cyber. And when I left, they had depth in technology. They had more modern technologies. We were actually the first to launch generative AI in the city of Dallas on a threat review platform that was looking at it. And I don't know if cyber people know what law, the SIM is, the Security Incident and Event Manager, but it was tied to the SIM, so it could go through logs. And anybody who's been a security analyst knows that's the driest job in the world. And it was able to parse that a lot faster using generative AI.
That's really neat. I guess I would not have expected municipal governments to be doing that investment.
Oh, it was. I looked at it from a maturity model. Let's crawl, walk, run. It wasn't the first SIM I brought in. The first SIM as CISO I brought in, and it just was a Band-Aid. And then I said, okay, how are we going to go to the next thing? And this, 2 years in the making, and we made it happen. And really, the first generative AI piece in the city was looking at and parsing logs so that we could address issues faster.
You're telling me about, so I'm assuming it was successful, right?
Yeah, definitely. It was a product called Mixed Mode. And I adored it. It gave you great metrics as management. I'd quit putting on my technical engineer hat for quite a while by that point, but I could go into that tool as an executive and get real quality data and information out, to the point of even saying, hey, this is what it saved us in security analyst work. And we presented that to the city council and management on a monthly basis saying, hey, just so you know, bringing generative AI has had this impact on our budget. We don't need this much anymore in resources.
When I'm thinking about Gen AI, right, I have been worried about people using, whether it's Chat GPT or Claude Monet or whatever, and people take an intellectual property and stick it into it. And that's typically what I'm worried about is like, hey, how do I get that under control? How do I have that visibility to see?
It's a little bit of the beauty in government, right? Like 90% of our data is open records available. So that's a great thing. So we're only having to really address the 10% that, unlike private, where it's 99% this way and 1% that way. It's funny, over my years, I would sit in conferences on roundtables, and we would have, guys that were working as CISOs in a financial organization that had really good secrets around their algorithms to look at hedge funds and stuff like that. And I'd look at them and I'd say, well, I don't really have those problems. I have to worry about only 10%. I have to worry about producing the other 90% on some basis, but the 10% is all I have to worry about, where it's 99 for them.
That is another insight that I did not expect. But you're right. So I was just on, one of the Texas websites looking at open data, like seeing all the data they have available to download for, which, again, if you were inside of a private company, you would not have the stuff, just on the open data website, right? And make
not that you're really short on any, you still got privacy issues eventually, that rolled up to me and how you're handling privacy. And we had healthcare data, and we had some critical infrastructure data, and we had PCI data. So not that we were amiss and didn't have any of that fun stuff to work on. But you have a less of a footprint than you do in the private world.
We're talking a little bit about networks and network infrastructure. I keep thinking that municipal governments also have critical infrastructure, OT kind of systems as well.
Yes.
I mean, I'm thinking like, every time you see like one of those movies where they're using IT to hack a city to look at the cameras and making sure they can get their car down past the red lights and stuff like that. It's like, that seems like all critical infrastructure that you would have to protect too.
Well, so the cameras themselves, I don't know if I'd qualify them as critical infrastructure. There's parts that are, and all that stuff you see in the movies where they hack a camera, all that stuff is real. It's happened. It happened in Dallas. They, some of it was just pure, the cyber rule is the first thing you do is remove the default password and username. And sometimes it didn't happen. And so they would get in and hack a camera like that. I think there was one incident in my tenure there that happened, but there was one prior to me getting there. They hacked the tornado siren and they set it off. So some of that's real. In the OT world, I think what you're seeing is, well, twofold. One is some of the OT in municipal is old. It's analog, so it makes it more challenging for the bad guys because it's not running on IT as much. As they're moving it to IT, you're going to have to address making sure that those OT systems, are protected. And I don't know, I think it was last year, the year before, it was last year, I believe, that there was a bunch in West Texas that were infiltrated. And what I was told, I didn't see it, the news report myself, but the Chinese actually came out and said, "Yeah, we did that. We've played around in there in your OT systems. We were able to get in there." And like that's all sorts of a scary thing, that they could change the ratio of chlorine to water and all sorts of crazy stuff. So
yeah, I've definitely had red team exercises where we had like building facility, management systems on the internet, and then people were able to, mess with controls and then even use those systems to, get onto the network. And, and again, it goes back to that. Hey, can you make sure that you're putting something online that doesn't have the default password, that has the right kind of protections in front of it and that kind of stuff. And,
right.
In my last position, we had a lot of OT systems because we had manufacturing plants and that kind of thing. And I always felt like the there's more damage that can be done with OT systems. Like the impact is a little bit more real. Like you have robots that go out of control. It's probably not what you want. You have stoplights that are out of control. It's probably not what you want. You probably don't want your chlorinated water, mix to be messed up with. There's definitely more impacts to physical safety, I think, in the OT world. It feels that way. But I also feel like a lot of the controls for like, hey, how do you get this stuff into control are generally basic IT kind of practices, like stop using Windows XP as your human data interface, or it's like just
right.
Then we get people to update this stuff, and stop using the USB drive to put a 4G USB stick in so that you can manage it remotely. It's a lot of those kinds of things that I always feel like is like what plaguing us in OT. I always feel like it's an IT problem, but I don't know. How do you feel about it?
So that's a great question. It's there's this convergence with IT and OT, and I think it is an IT problem as we converge those, as we're trying to get more data out and more management in, and we just got to be smarter about it, and we got to forego convenience for the sake of security and making sure that it's secure as possible. It's one of those, and I've never worked in DoD, but you hear about that you go through this to get to that, and before you can get to the last piece, you gotta give your firstborn and all of those things, and that's really just has to be the approach. It isn't meant there really to be inconvenient. It's really meant there to keep the systems as protected as possible, especially if we're looking given the criticality of the systems.
Agreed. I think that, having worked in the military space myself, it's definitely, we had totally separate networks and multiple networks that were separated, right? And,
yep.
We wanted to move data between those different places, and we had systems to, diodes and things like that allowed us to move data between different systems, but it's a very controlled kind of activity. We don't seem to have those kinds of, thinking or systems thinking inside commercial spaces, right? Inside commercial. And it's not, like I said, it's not that, these are systems that I remember working on in like 2004, 2005. So they're not new, but they are, could be definitely seen as inconvenient. But they are controllable. It's definitely a controllable environment. And I definitely see that there's a lot of value in being able to manage systems remotely and being able to diagnose problems remotely and all those kinds of things that you probably want to have in your OT systems. But I do think that it's just being smart about how you're doing it. It's
exactly
a lot of it is just terminology. It's like, we use the Purdue model, or we use this model, or we use that model. But the truth is that it's still IT. It's like, if you want high availability, you don't want this switch to go down, then get a better switch. Keep multiples of this switch so that you don't have like outages when you don't need them.
And that's where private has just got to figure it out, right? Like, if you're looking at the big private organizations, how do they manage making sure that there's enough depth, not just in cyber, but in their overall operations, so that they're never down, And I'm going to use like American Airlines because they're right here in Dallas. But, how often have you seen American Airlines go down? And they just don't, because they have depth and resiliency built. It's part of the game plan. It's from day one. Municipal governments, it's a lot about managing resources, especially around finance. So it's a little more of a challenge to go to the city manager and say, hey, we need 4 million instead of 2 million to make these systems resilient. He's like, well, the system's working. Why do we need an additional 2 million? Because we want to make sure it's resilient enough that if the first one goes down, we have that second node that it comes up. We have that depth in playbook, and that's a cyber principle, but it really is an operational principle.
And I agree with you. I think it is a cyber principle that availability management is definitely on the cyber side. But I tend to expect that the businesses usually care more about availability than I do, generally because there's some business transaction that's happening as part of their availability, and they don't want to do that. So, and that's always made my life easier. But I have been in places that availability was not like important. I mean, it was important. They wanted transactions, but to build resilient systems that were able to sustain like a database dropping and then you could still do your transactions, that didn't seem to be that important. They would just blame a contractor for the failure.
It didn't become important until it became important when the system didn't work. Right?
This particular company didn't track like how much money they were losing on their e-commerce sites because of these things. And but I have worked at other companies that were like every time you lost 5 or 10 minutes of time, they would start telling you how much money you cost them because you failed to do this thing. And they would just add this numbers up, which I thought was a much better system than just hoping that you have available systems.
And I honestly think that that's something that I think is a miss in government is we don't have a good ROI on stuff. There's no number that I know except for when we start talking about loss of life. I really would like to see the ROI when computer-aided dispatch goes down or 911 goes down. What is the ROI? How do you quantify that so you can start not competing against private, but at least speaking the same language? And right. I think that is one gap that I've seen.
Well, I don't think that's especially in security. I think us coming up with an ROI number has always been difficult, right? I mean, if we're doing our job and we're doing the right kind of preventive kind of capabilities and we're detecting things early and responding to them effectively, then our losses we don't have losses. We shouldn't have losses, right? And then,
right.
But you're still paying this much money for this, but you're always trying to figure out well, did I really need it or was it just the technology? I mean, I remember one conversation I had with a CIO at a bank. And we were talking about how we would, whenever we had a problem, we would say, okay, this was the attack vector. This is what this system worked. This system worked. This system didn't work. It did not block or whatever. And we would kind of line it all up. And that conversation was all about how our technology wasn't protecting us and how we had to go do something better. And this is SOC work, right? Secure operations.
Right.
And then, but then the CIO was really upset because, well, what about all the things that did work? I spent all this money on firewalls. I spent all this money on this. He's like, aren't these things working? So then we had to kind of change our approach to it to say, okay, we were actually getting an ROI on the firewalls because it was actually preventing a lot of stuff, preventing a lot of things, and we were detecting a lot of things. But, every once in a while we would have a problem, but everyone likes to manage by exception. It's like when you have a problem, that's what you talk about. But getting to that ROI has always been somewhat of a difficult challenge. I think.
Yeah. And cyber especially. One of the approaches I took when I first started as a CISO in Dallas was our main vendor, our only one vendor we had. They would come to me and say, look at all these things we're stopping. And I would say, that's great, but that's why I bought you. I want to know everything you're not stopping. And they went, what do you mean? And I was like, no, those are the things that we need to focus on. And they went through and they did a whole bunch of work so that the reports came out. We're talking about the things that they weren't, that they were kind of gray or they didn't know what to do with or couldn't or weren't stopping. And that provided a lot of value for the team because now they can dig into those. I mean, if you're stopping it, that's great. That's why we bought the tool. That's what we're supposed to do. Right. It's working as advertised. Perfect. Tell me what you're not able to do. And then we can start focusing, resources to addressing that. Do we need another tool that does that? Or do we need, what is the compensating control that's amiss to trying to prevent those things that we're a little bit sketchy on or we don't know and getting that in a better place?
Right. Yeah. When you're saying that, I'm thinking about antivirus. So it's like, look at all these viruses that we caught. It's like,
exactly.
Well, what about the ones you didn't catch? What about this incident?
That was actually the tool.
Yeah. So because I mean, and it's just so crazy, like in SOCs and security operations, how they're like, oh, well, there was an attack and the EDR tool caught it. Cool, that's great, but how did that attack get there? That's what I want to know.
Right.
Failed along the line that the attack actually got to the user. What was it that didn't work that now we're detecting it on the box? And it's incident response. It's like what do you know, what do you don't know, right? And it's like, are you breach or you're not breach? Do you know why you're breach or not breach? It's like there's a little matrix there, and it's like, well, I don't know if we have a breach. Well, what about your system? do you really think is the key thing that's keeping you safe? Because if you're not breached, then there's probably some reason why you're not breached. What is it that you're getting the most value out of? But I don't think we do a lot of digging into those kinds of analyses enough. I think some places do, but
I always wonder if it's because they haven't gotten to you yet. They haven't pulled your number.
Yeah. You're in a hybrid environment. You have some data centers. I imagine you must be using some SaaS products as well.
Yes, we do.
And at SquareX, we've been doing a lot of research that we're seeing that there are some gaps in browser technologies. Well, we're seeing that there's a lot of proliferation of SaaS apps that are happening in companies nowadays. And I imagine it's true for municipalities because it's just a more effective use of resources to, buy, M365 and have your email and stuff kind of, outsourced to Microsoft or Google or something than maintaining all that kind of infrastructure yourself. I don't know if that's true for the city of Austin or the city of Dallas, but maybe more cost effective to do that. But because of that, we're seeing that there's a big uptick in the use of browsers and everything. You're using a browser like all the time today.
Right.
What do you think the case is for municipal organizations? Are they using more SaaS apps? Are they?
Yeah, you're seeing a trend to moving more to more SaaS apps. Like I said, for us as a CIO, it was Cloud Smart. So I didn't want to just jump the gun because it felt like the right thing to do. We did it as it was a smart thing to do. From the cyber side, we were seeing there's some tools coming in, Island, Safaric, that are coming out there really helping you with that security side and managing. Yeah. I was headed down that in Dallas. Like I said, I'm only day one here, so I haven't cracked that nut here yet, but I probably will. And saying, hey, this is something that could add a lot of value, low risk to implement, high reward as far as protecting the cities, especially as we're moving to more SaaS apps, browser-based applications, getting away from thick clients and those things.
Right. What you can do inside a browser today is crazy. It's like I are on this call right now.
Right.
On every single call is that we're in a call right now in a browser doing a podcast, and it's recording us and everything. And this is not, you couldn't do this in 1995 and, in CSA Mosaic, right? And it's amazing what you can do in a browser today. And it's such an easy way to deploy an app. 2025 is just deploy a browser app. Everyone has
right? Even some of your on-prem applications are using the browser-based application as a service, and it's smart. It's getting away from some of those vulnerabilities that they had, but then it creates new vulnerabilities, and that's always the gamble in cyber, is you're going from this vulnerability to that vulnerability. You're just trading evils, however you want to say it.
No, true, very much. I mean, it's like as the technology enhances, as this kind of curve of like how we use technology and how it's deployed and better ways of deploying, whether it's Kubernetes or containers or virtual machines, or remember we used to put everything rack and stack in our own data centers. Now we're using the cloud and everything. As these things have become more capable or more useful, and we've adopted new technology to make things go faster, we're also having to follow the attack surface. The attack surface changes as your technology changes, right? And as the business
exactly
changes, right? And so it's definitely feeling like in today's world, we're spending a lot more time in the browser, and and it's great to see that people are starting to focus on it. Like you said, there's Island, there's Seraphic, there's SquareX, and being able to detect threats before they get on your network. I was reading the Mandiant report. I don't know if you saw the M Trends report 2025 a few weeks ago, and it pretty much holds true for the 2024 report. But there's a section that talks about different kinds of attacks that were successful when Mandiant was doing their incident response. And if you look at like how those attacks were done, whether it's phishing or social engineering or website compromises or malicious downloads, most like 60% of those attacks are actually, traversed the browser. Like somehow you went through a browser and it now landed on your machine. And somewhat interesting to me that I'm glad to hear that you're thinking about the browser and how to protect it. I don't see that often. I think most people think that their EDR tools or their SASE tools are actually going to protect them, and they do. And there's no doubt that they do. But when these attacks are happening through the browser, and if you can just keep it off your network longer, or you can stop it from happening before it even gets to your EDR tool, I think that's a better place to be. It feels like you agree.
Yeah, for sure. You touched something when I came to so I'm originally from Madison, Wisconsin, and I moved to Texas about 12 years ago. And I didn't, Madison doesn't have fire ants. And fire ants are an interesting thing here in Texas. And you never kill them, right? It's just, you get them to move to the neighbors, what you end up doing. And I always would tell people, like in cyber, that's just kind of what we're doing, is we're making sure they move to the neighbor. They don't want to stay here in our yard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like the way that's my place here is like I try to kill the ants here, and they just move a few yards some other direction, or
exactly.
but you're right. But it is like that in cyber. It's like we want we don't have to be the fastest runner, but we just have to be faster than the
neighbor. Yeah,
that whole error thing, right? But I think that with the browser and SaaS and everything else, it feels like there's just more opportunities to exfiltrate. There's more opportunities to, for users to use products that you didn't expect them to use. I mean, like shadow SaaS, kind of unsanctioned apps. Do you have any thoughts on shadow SaaS? I mean, do you feel like you have good control of that, or do you feel like
shadow SaaS? I would say no, we don't. I think we had a pretty good handle on Dallas, but we've got a ways to go here in Austin. There's so many ways to procure stuff, and the departments, they take advantage of that, say. And
Absolutely. And that's not just in municipal governments.
No. We're just good victims for that.
It's like this goes back to your forensic accounting background. It's like follow the money.
Exactly. And that's the honest truth. That's how they handled it in Dallas. Is you had to end up controlling the money so that it couldn't happen, and then all of a sudden you figured out it became more centralized that way.
Yeah, and one of the big tech companies, that's what we did, is we just started following the money, started saying like what kind of expenses could go through the corporate expense accounting systems, and which could not, and and then you're just like again following the money. The money is going to tell you where it is, right? And it's a good practice. I think it's unfortunate that we have so many products that have free licenses, in the SaaS world that allow you to use their product, but they don't put the right kind of technical controls around it as well. Like, for example, the one that pops in my head right now is like Postman, which is a great tool for doing API development. But the free version of the product allows you to do API development, but you don't get to control your security keys and stuff that you're putting in. They just are just public, but you have to pay to get the private repository where you're doing that work. And it's, and that's one example on the development side. But, there's a lot of products that are also, giving you free use of their tools, but, now you're the product.
And I think that's some lack of education in municipal government, especially when it comes to free things. They think it's free, meaning it's free to their use. The problem is we're still an enterprise, and they need to make sure that we're approaching it from the enterprise perspective. I get people trying to, keep the cost as low as possible, given that the budgets are tight and stuff. But we have to approach it from an enterprise perspective. And that can come back and bite the organization, even government, if we're not careful in making sure that, the right licensing, the T's and C's, I have had that happen. We had a product that they were leveraging, the free version, and they came back and said, hey, you have X amount of these deployed across your organization, and you're an enterprise, so we're going to start charging you. At the end of the day, we negotiated, but I think there's a little lack of knowledge in government that free is not free.
That's a good way to put it, right? If free is not free, there's always some cost, whether it's I don't like it that a lot of vendors are also making you pay for security capabilities and stuff too. But we could probably go on for days talking about that part. But, you're a founding member of the Coalition of City CISOs. Can you tell us more about that coalition?
So that's a great question. So it was the week before COVID, and Mike Markelson and Greg McCarthy from Boston, Mike's in San Fran, they had been working on reaching out to city CISOs to talk, shop, because there's some unique things in municipal government to CISOs. And we met in San Francisco at RSA, had dinner together. We all flew home. And then I think it was like 2 days later, COVID, and everybody's going home. And it was just crazy. That coalition, although I guess as a new CISO, I'll probably reach out to them again. They'll be like, "Hey, you're back, Brian." But it's talking the same language, because there are some unique things in municipal government. Here in Dallas, we have 40 plus departments that are doing 43 different things. We're not one line of business. We're not just servicing airplanes, or we're not just making snack foods or whatever. We have all sorts of, police, fire, you name it, water, electricity, in any given day, and we're all doing it all together, and it's kind of a jumbled chaos mess. So I think that coalition really was put together to say, hey, what are the things that we can get together, talk about from a security perspective, as well as have a nice shoulder to cry on when you need to call somebody that will understand the problem a little better than just, my brother and CISO from American Airlines or Mary Kay here in Dallas,
Yeah. No, I think it's really good. I think it's super interesting. I'm actually, in the little town that I live in Texas, in the county, actually. I mean, I think that I don't see anything about cybersecurity. And I think that I would love to volunteer some of my time to help them with security matters. I don't know how to help them, but you're right. Y'all are, city governments are like little conglomerate companies with a bunch of different parts of what makes the city government happen is a bunch of different kinds of very distinct capabilities. And, kind of managing all of that, I think would be a challenge, just because they all have completely different things that they're thinking about. It's not like you're working at a tech company and you have 12 brands that are all using the same e-commerce platform and all selling travel goods, right? So you all can kind of talk the same language. They have the same kind of customer profiles and everything else. But, when you have a completely different kind of business, like, the police department plus energy, they're not going to have the same language. They're not going to have the same kind of problems. I don't see they're going to have email problems and they're going to have help desk problems, but they're not going to have the value proposition of like what it is that they do to create their outcomes. They're going to be completely different. And the technology that you use is going to be completely different. It seems very challenging, but I might look into the Coalition of City CISOs, myself, to see if I can help my little local city here.
It's a great organization. And I know Mike and Greg and Bruce Coughing from Chicago still are working on it. I've distanced a little since I went into this CIO, CTO stuff. I handed the baton off a little bit, but it's a great organization, and I'll probably end up reaching back out now that it's the CISO here. Yeah.
Well, I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you have like 7. Do you have 7 children? Is that right?
That's accurate. I do.
And then you fostered over 20 kids?
What's that?
And you fostered over 20 kids?
Oh, 29.
29.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Oh my gosh, that's a whole podcast unto itself, that story. But we started out fostering. We were going to adopt one girl, and 7 later. We retired. Last August. My last one, she's back doing homework. She's 15, headed towards 16. We're blessed. I have really good kids, across the spectrum. The one thing I will say that they're all different, and they all are very much the same. So
that's nice. That's amazing. How has your family experience influenced your leadership style?
I would say it's taught me patience in government.
You can't get mad. You can't get mad all the time, right?
I use the line all the time, and at work. I said, "Look, guys, you guys can't possibly have as much drama at home. I have 5 girls, so you're not even gonna get close to the drama I have. So let's stop with the drama. Let's get stuff done." So that's how it's kind of influenced.
So it gave you patience. That's what I love. That. So what's next for you personally and professionally? Are there any initiatives or projects that you're passionate about?
Right now, my passion is doing the CISO, looking at Austin's cyber program, making that better, making it best in class, and then we'll see what happens. I didn't. If you would have told me a year ago I'd be in Austin, I would have told you probably not. But here I am, and I'm excited to work for this leadership team here, and I'm excited to make it better, and then we'll go from there. I don't know, maybe down the road, do some more consulting. I really like being a practitioner, so we'll see.
Yeah, I have one last question. If you could wave a magic wand and solve one cybersecurity challenge facing cities, what would it be?
Ooh. When I started as a CISO in Dallas, I used to get asked this question all the time. What's the one thing you would want more of? And I would always tell them it's time. I never could get enough time to get things done as fast as I wanted to get them done. I like to move at the speed of business, fast. Government does not do that. I go back to my patience. And I would say that still holds true. I would like to have more time to get things done in a better state. So whoever I hand it off to, they can pick and run with it, modernize it, move forward with it.
Great answer. Dr. Gardner, it was great having you on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation.
I appreciate it, John. It was a lot of fun.